RNA-based drugs for different applications. But when COVID situation came earlier this year, Moderna started to pivot into building or developing COVID-19 vaccines. And that just shows how much of a platform technology it is. It's actually allows them to pivot into different areas because the technology is adaptable to different important needs. The other thing is to really show that it's scientifically strong. So look at seminar article and really try to publish a groundbreaking paper in a leading journal, and that's another part of this. And finally, to try to not only publish a great scientific paper, but also be able to create intellectual property and ideally a blocking seminal patent or family of patents that can protect the position of the company, the new company that's getting launched. And this is very important. Again, publication is very important to get the science out to the real world, but without having the intellectual property protection, it's hard to get the thing launched because investors are not going to be as vested or interested in trying to launch the company, because then anyone else can copy the technology. So actually the patents winds up enhancing innovation as opposed to decreasing it. And finally, this concept of don't do it too early, develop the technology, push it as far as possible within the laboratory before you actually launch the company. And in many of the types of cases that are biomedical, having the proof of principle in animal models, which are basically the preclinical models to human trials, is very important, so that it's all been validated, vetted, and the startup can now raise the funds to be able to do the human clinical trials. So some of the other things that I would say are important is to really focus on this high impact problems. And I've learned that through experience that you can develop something that's really interesting and differentiated and has a intellectual property that's protected, but unless it's a big market, affects a lot of people, investors are not going to be as excited about it. And that's really important for really bridging this valley of death, this what they call the barrier between what we do in a laboratory at universities or research institutes and what is needed to make that innovation come to real world. And bridging this valley of death really does require understanding not just the science, but also what is the market, investors, customers need to be able to do that. And one of the things that, again, these last 2 points about really building collaborations and creating convergent ecosystems are also very important. So I think one of the things you may think about Bob Langer is that he is one person, a genius working and developing all these things. But in reality, that's not how it works. And I like this analogy here. So this is Newton, a cartoon of him, and of course the apple hitting his head, and then he's coming up with the idea of really this whole F equals ma, and revolutionizing physics at the time. Now this is how maybe science and really big breakthroughs were done hundreds of years ago, but this is no longer the case. Problems are much more complex and require many different fields to join together and be able to address them. So this is much more like it now, where Apple has to hit the head of many people before the idea gets fully developed. And this is true also for Bob. Bob doesn't work in vacuum. He works very closely with many other stakeholders. In fact, when I entered science, his innovations in working with a clinician, particularly Jay Vacanti, who is a surgeon at Mass General Hospital, developed this whole field of tissue engineering, which got me very excited when I was finishing my undergraduate to enter this field, and it's been just continued for him. He's developed a lot of different teams with different people to be able to deal with different problems, and that's very important. Creating a convergent science approach where there's very little barriers between people from different fields. And I wanted to give you an example of the kind of work that we do and how it involves different people. So this is actually a picture from one of the meetings that we've set up in trying to address particular problems. And in these meetings, what we have is that, as you can see, we have clinicians, engineers, chemists, biologists, and many different disciplines represented. And almost looks like Noah's Ark, because you have, you know, one of everything, in this case, not a pair, but at least one of everything, this different fields represented. And that's what it takes a lot of times to be able to understand the problem, as well as come up with innovative solutions about it. And in our own group, we also have a very similar mentality where we do have people from all over working together, and people think differently because of their own scientific and personal backgrounds, and that actually allows them to come up with things that are much more than some of the individuals. And I've been also very, very lucky through the connections that I've made in science. So one of the amazing things about what we do is the interactions that we have as colleagues. Again, people from different backgrounds and different knowledge, expertise working together. And I've been very lucky to have amazing mentors. Many of them are listed here and shown here. And this is one of my favorite pictures, which has Bob Langer, who was my PhD mentor, as well as Michael Sefton, who was involved in my earlier training at University of Toronto, as well as Dr. Nicholas Pepys, one of the leading figures in biomedical engineering, and one of his students, Dr. Tony Miko. So it's just, I think it's great to have people who care about real world problems working and being able to interact with each other as well. So my own story that I wanted to talk about today is something that's, again, brought me in contact with a clinician to try to build something that would address his own clinical need. So this is Rami Oklu. Rami and I have become friends over the past few years, 5-6 years. And what Rami does, he's an interventional radiologist. So what he does is that he plays with catheters. You know, I often call him, he's the plumber of the body. He takes little tubes and he navigates blood vessels. He moves them around inside the body, and he can perform pretty incredible plumbing work, which is opening blood vessels or closing blood vessels based on the needs of the patient. So Rami and I met when I was in Boston, and what he presented to me was a number of problems that they've had, which involve things related to plugging blood vessels where you don't want, let's say, unwanted bleeding, or when you have aneurysms where you need to block off. And Rami and I worked together over the past few years to develop a material that I'm going to talk about here. And it's been a very productive collaborations. We've worked on many publications, a number of patents, and this startup company that I'm going to talk about. And it's been